Hello, beautiful creatures of the world, and welcome back to Coffee with Kerri-Lynn. This is as good as it's gonna get today. I'm on my deathbed. I'm off my deathbed. It's 6 degrees in the far north of Maine, up along the Canadian border. It is a 2-wood stove day in the Crown of Maine. I hope everybody is having a beautiful day wherever you might be. I hope you're having a day filled with fabulosity and dang good coffee, because you deserve a dang good cup of coffee to get through your day. We're going to be talking about the Zizian death cult that is wreaking murder and mayhem from one coast of the United States to the other. What is the Zizian death cult? Well, they are a group of radical extreme leftists. They're vegans. They are highly educated mathematical geniuses, literally. They are super intelligent, and the news is dubbing them the whiz kids. They are also a transgender cult. The Zizian death cult seems to revolve around one person who calls themselves Ziz. They liken themselves to the Manson family. And quite frankly, I think at the end of all that has happened, as the story unfolds, it is getting weirder and crazier. It's like it's upping levels as the story unfolds. And I think that we are going to discover that the Zizian death cult is very similar to the Manson family. The people that followed Charlie Manson were not stupid people. They were not accepted by their peers. They kind of lived on the edge of their social community. And I think that we are discovering the same thing with the Zizian death cult. They want to be accepted for who they are, what they are. And Charlie Manson was able to manipulate the people in his cult right up to the point where they murdered for him. And I think that we are going to discover that the Zizian death cult is functioning in much the same way. As I said, the group revolves around a person that calls themselves Ziz. Now, Ziz is a transgender woman whose legal name is Jack LaSoda. And for the purposes of this video, because the Zizian cult members are being arrested and charged, their legal gender and their legal names are being used in all the legal paperwork. As far as I can discover through my research, not one of the people involved in the cult murders has either legally changed their gender on their birth certificate or their legal name from birth. Their government ID identifies them as either male or female and their legal name. Now, they identify as transgender. They've picked their pronouns they would prefer you to use. They've picked the name they prefer you to use, but the law can't do that. So in order to not make the story as complicated with this identifying name and this identifying gender, we are strictly going to be using the current legal gender and name of those in the Zizian cult that have been arrested and charged with one thing or another. From what I gather, none of them have made a permanent medical transition to their desired gender. Ladies and gentlemen, Beautiful creatures of the world. Unfortunately, on January 20th, 2025, Customs and Border Patrol agent David Mayland was killed in the line of duty when he stopped 2 alleged members of the Zizian death cult in Coventry, Vermont. See, what happened was Felix Bolkholt, who was a German national, and if I butcher their names, whatever, and Teresa Youngbloot, she's 21 years old, she is an American, she's from Seattle, Washington. She lost contact with her parents in May of 2024, so they filed a missing persons report in Seattle, Washington, because they didn't know where their daughter went. Now, it appears that Felix, who identifies as a woman, but is actually a man, and Teresa, who is a biological female, who identifies as a transgender man, they were at a hotel in Coventry, Vermont. And they were doing some strange, suspicious things. So the hotel ended up calling the authorities because they allegedly saw Felix and Teresa with guns and with tactical black bloc gear. The hotel didn't want no part of whatever business they was dealing in, so they did call the authorities. The car that Felix and Teresa were in was registered to Felix. I believe Teresa was actually driving. Customs and Border Patrol agent David Mayland saw the vehicle, pulled the vehicle over, and the 2 alleged Zizian cult members opened fire on Customs and Border Patrol agent Mayland, killing him. There was fire from David Mayland, and Felix ended up expiring at the scene of the crime he was committing. And Teresa Youngbloot was taken into custody. So we have to wait for her story as to why all these shenanigans went down. It appears that both Teresa and Felix had a little business that they were doing in Coventry, Vermont, possibly with Michelle Yako. How you spell her last name is Zajko. I'm sure I botched it, but whatever. Michelle Yako is 32 years old, and she was tracked down to a Coventry, Vermont residence via DMV records. Now, what is very odd about Michelle Yako is that in 2022, on New Year's Eve, her parents, Richard and Rita Yako, were murdered inside of their Chester Heights, Pennsylvania home. There was no arrest in their deaths to this date, but their daughter Michelle was a person of interest. It appears that the guns used in the murder of Customs and Border Patrol agent David Mayland were purchased by Michelle Yako, whose Coventry, Vermont residence was identified through DMV records. So these 2, Felix and Teresa, killed Border Patrol agent Mayland with guns that were connected to Michelle Yako, whose parents were murdered on Christmas Eve in 2022. That is not all with the Zizians. 2022 is apparently a very busy year for the Zizian cult. In the Bay Area, Vallejo, California, Mr. Curtis Lind, who was 80 years old, was attacked by members of the Zizian cult. The news is reporting this two ways. There's two versions. I do not know which one is true. One version says that 80-year-old Curtis Lind was renting a parcel of his property, it had no buildings on it, to members of the Zizian cult. They provided their own shelter. They started doing really weird things on his property. The neighbors started freaking out, started talking to Curtis. They wanted them removed from the property. So Curtis needed to evict them. The other version that is being reported by the mainstream media is that the Zizian cult members came upon Curtis Lind's property and just started squatting on there. Whatever which way it was, Curtis Lind wanted the Zizians off of his land. And they did not want to go. So in 2022, Curtis Lind was attacked by Alexander Leatham, Amir Borhemian, and Suri Dow. Now, they attacked Mr. Lind. They tried stabbing him to death. But Mr. Lind fought back, and he shot and killed Amir Borium. Mr. Lind was set to testify in the trial of his attackers, Leatham and Mr. Dow. During the attack in 2022, Curtis Lind, even though he received several stab wounds, also lost his eye. Now on January 17th, 2025, just days before, Customs and Border Patrol agent Mayland was murdered by two alleged members of the Zizian cult. Curtis Lind was stabbed and had his throat slit outside on the street of his Vallejo, California home by Maximilian Bentley Snyder. And Maximilian Bentley Snyder allegedly claimed it was to prevent Curtis Lind from testifying against members of the Zizian cult. Society's gone crazy, ladies and gentlemen, beautiful creatures of the world. We have 4 innocent people that have now passed on from this world at the hands of crazy cultists. I don't know what's going to happen in 2025. I know that these crazy, extreme Antifa protesters are getting back on the street. They're protesting in Washington, D.C. They're protesting in California. They're protesting in L.A. We're having protests across the country. If you're not paying attention, mainstream media really isn't putting it out there. You need to get onto alternative media. There are protests across the country about deporting illegal criminal alien migrants. Antifa's at it again. The crazy extremist leftists are at it again, ladies and gentlemen. Beautiful creatures of the world. We saw this during Donald Trump's last presidency. They all got out there on the street. They all created havoc. People were seriously injured. People were killed and murdered. Society is broken. When you are out and about in public, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you are highly aware of your surroundings. Make sure that you understand and have the knowledge on how to protect yourself in case you are ever put in a position where you need to protect yourself. Things are getting crazy. Things are getting wild. I don't know where this Zizian death cult story is going to end. All I have a feeling of is that we are going to be left with a lot of questions and no good answers. Ladies and gentlemen, be the kindness that you want to see in the world. And as always, Carpe Diem, because no one promised you a tomorrow.